Primitive. Commander Nathan Brooks repeated quietly, looking through the reinforced observation glass as the alien fleet filled the night sky above Earth. Funny. Every empire in history has called someone primitive right before making the biggest mistake of its existence. The words never reached the invaders. They were only meant for the handful of men and women standing beside him inside Orbital Defense Command beneath Cheyenne Mountain. Above them, thousands of miles away, the Victory Dominion's invasion armada drifted into perfect formation, each massive warship reflecting the sunlight like polished steel blades. The broadcast from the enemy flagship echoed across every communication network on Earth. Grand Marshal Kaler Voss stood at the center of his command bridge with the relaxed confidence of someone who had never known defeat. His silver ceremonial armor caught the light as he slowly examined images of Earth's orbital defenses rotating across the holographic display. Missile platforms, aging defense stations, conventional interceptors, rail batteries mounted on old lunar fortifications. His officers exchanged amused glances. This, Kaler said, almost disappointed, is the civilization that refused our protection? A ripple of quiet laughter spread across the bridge. One young tactical officer leaned closer to the display and pointed toward a cluster of orbital weapon platforms. Marshal, our Academy museums contain more advanced systems than these. Kaler smiled without taking his eyes off the screen. Exactly. Millions of people across Earth watched the transmission in silence. Families paused dinner. Construction workers gathered around portable screens. Police officers stood beside parked cruisers. In diners outside Dallas, coffee shops in Seattle, apartment buildings in Boston, and small towns scattered across the Midwest, nobody spoke. They simply watched. Inside Orbital Defense Command, Nathan folded his arms. His expression never changed. He had spent 23 years in the United States Navy before accepting a commission in the United Earth Defense Fleet. Experience had taught him something simple. The loudest person in the room usually knew the least about what mattered. A communications specialist adjusted her headset. Commander, the Victory are requesting a direct response. Nathan nodded once. Put them through. Kaler's face expanded across the main display. His eyes studied Nathan the way an experienced collector examined an antique. Commander Brooks, the Marshal said politely. I expected someone older. Perhaps someone carrying the wisdom to recognize an unwinnable situation. Nathan gave the faintest smile. Age doesn't always recognize wisdom either. Another wave of quiet amusement rolled across the alien bridge. Kaler gestured toward the holographic image of Earth's defenses. Your weapons are primitive. Chemical projectiles. Electromagnetic launchers. Hardware that belongs in a museum. We crossed half the galaxy expecting innovation. Instead, we found history. Nathan glanced toward the giant tactical display behind him, then back at the Marshal. You're seeing exactly what we intended you to see. The sentence lingered in the silence. Several alien officers exchanged puzzled looks before laughing again. Kaler's smile widened. Denial is a remarkably human trait. Nathan shrugged. Sometimes. I will give your government 2 hours to surrender. Refuse, and these defenses become historical exhibits. Nathan looked down at his watch before meeting the Marshal's eyes once more. We'll be here. The transmission ended. No speeches. No threats. No panic. Only silence settled over the command center as dozens of officers returned to their stations. Somewhere deeper inside the mountain, hidden behind blast doors that few people on Earth even knew existed, systems that had remained dormant for decades quietly began waking up. Deep beneath Cheyenne Mountain, the room everyone casually called the basement stretched farther than most people imagined possible. Concrete walls disappeared into shadows. Rows of old analog switches sat beside cutting-edge quantum processors, as if half a century of engineering had decided to work together instead of replacing itself. Dr. Benjamin Carter walked through the maze carrying a plain stainless steel coffee mug, nodding politely to technicians who had worked beside him for years without ever asking what the deepest level actually contained. That silence was part of the job. It always had been. Emily Carter caught up with her father outside a reinforced security door. She still wore her engineering coveralls, a tablet tucked under one arm. Dad, everyone upstairs is saying the Victory scanned every defense platform we have. Benjamin smiled faintly. They scanned every defense platform they were supposed to find. Emily frowned. You knew this was coming. He hesitated before answering. I knew someone eventually would believe appearances more than evidence. The heavy security door unlocked with a low mechanical click. Inside waited a chamber unlike any military facility Emily had ever seen. There were no giant weapons, no missile racks, no glowing reactors. Instead, thousands of ordinary-looking server cabinets stretched across the room beside rows of maintenance consoles covered in handwritten labels. Some equipment looked brand new. Other machines carried inspection stickers dating back more than 20 years. Emily looked around in disbelief. This is Black Horizon? Benjamin nodded once. Most people expect history to be buried in museums. Sometimes history is hidden inside warehouses. Before she could ask another question, every monitor in the room flashed amber. A calm female voice echoed through the speakers. Orbital surveillance confirms Vexury reconnaissance drones entering restricted solar approach corridors. Emily looked at the display. Tiny blue icons moved confidently toward Earth, weaving between communication satellites and weather platforms. They are mapping civilian infrastructure, she whispered. Benjamin shook his head. No, they believe they are mapping military weaknesses. Nearly 100,000 miles away, Grand Marshal Kaler Voss stood with his senior officers overlooking the tactical projection of the solar system. Colored symbols marked every object larger than 6 feet. Cargo ships, weather satellites, civilian research stations, lunar mining platforms. Everything had been categorized. His intelligence chief folded 4 hands behind his back. Marshal, we have completed full-spectrum analysis. Humanity possesses nothing capable of threatening the Dominion fleet. Kaler slowly circled the display. Nothing visible, he corrected. The intelligence officer looked surprised. You suspect deception? Kaler considered the question before answering. Every civilization hides something. The difference is that experienced commanders know how much weight to give the unknown. He tapped Earth's orbital network. These weather satellites. There are far too many. Another officer laughed. Primitive species often overbuild inefficient systems. Kaler nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps. Yet he quietly marked the network for continuous observation. Back inside the mountain, Nathan Brooks entered the chamber carrying a classified briefing folder. His face remained unreadable, but Benjamin recognized the urgency in the way he closed the door behind him. The president has scheduled the final authorization meeting, Nathan said. 1 hour. Emily looked from one man to the other. Final authorization for what? Neither answered immediately. Instead, Benjamin stepped toward an old steel cabinet mounted alone against the far wall. Unlike every digital lock in the facility, this one required a physical key. He reached into his pocket and removed a worn brass key that looked as though it belonged in an old farmhouse rather than the most secure military installation on Earth. As the lock slowly turned, every monitor across the room instantly shifted from amber to deep crimson. The calm computer voice returned, but this time even it sounded different. Black Horizon authorization sequence initiated. Presidential confirmation pending. Estimated time remaining, 59 minutes and 38 seconds. The countdown reached 54 minutes when President Daniel Harper entered the secure conference room beneath the White House. There were no television cameras, no prepared statements, and no polished speeches waiting for history books. Around the long walnut table sat the handful of people trusted with decisions that could change civilization forever. Nathan Brooks took a seat near the far end without saying a word. Dr. Benjamin Carter placed a weathered binder on the table instead of a tablet, drawing a curious glance from the president. You still keep paper records? Harper asked with a tired smile. Benjamin nodded. Paper cannot be hacked. That earned a few quiet laughs, but the tension quickly returned. A large display illuminated the room, showing the Vexury fleet continuing its slow advance. Thousands of ships maintained perfect formation, never rushing, never hesitating. They looked less like invaders and more like a machine carrying out a schedule. Secretary of Defense Olivia Reynolds broke the silence. They have deployed another wave of reconnaissance drones. They are scanning communication satellites, transportation grids, and power stations. They believe they are preparing for occupation, not a prolonged war. Nathan leaned forward. That is because every simulation they have ever run tells them we cannot survive the first day. Harper looked toward Benjamin. And ours. Benjamin folded his hands. Every simulation we have ever run assumed they would underestimate us. Across the solar system, Grand Marshal Kaler Voss studied the latest intelligence reports. His flagship remained almost perfectly still while dozens of officers moved around him with disciplined precision. One analyst pointed toward a highlighted orbital sector. "Marshal, civilian satellite traffic has increased by 3% during the last 20 minutes. Kaler barely looked up. "Panic? Possibly." Another officer added. "Human media continues normal programming. Sporting events are still being broadcast. Restaurants remain open. Commercial aviation has not stopped." Kaler frowned slightly. Either they possess remarkable emotional discipline. He paused before finishing the sentence. "Or they are performing for us." His chief strategist smiled confidently. Their history suggests denial before surrender. Kaler remained unconvinced. History also punishes commanders who mistake confidence for ignorance. He ordered every civilian satellite around Earth to remain under continuous observation, even as most of his officers privately believed the Marshal was wasting valuable resources. Back beneath Cheyenne Mountain, Emily Carter stood before a massive digital map filled with thousands of blinking blue markers. She still could not understand why ordinary weather satellites occupied the center of every tactical briefing. "Dad," she asked quietly, "if those things are so important, why did we never upgrade how they look?" Benjamin looked at one of the aging satellite models rotating on the screen. Its design appeared almost outdated beside modern spacecraft. "Because nobody questions something that looks old," he answered. Nathan walked over carrying a sealed authorization envelope. "Final approval is waiting on the president." Emily looked at both men. "If Black Horizon works the way everyone believes it does." She hesitated. "Why has nobody ever tested it?" Benjamin's expression softened. "Because some inventions are too expensive to demonstrate. The safest test is the one you never have to perform." Before anyone could respond, every monitor inside the command center flashed white for a split second. A priority alert appeared across every screen simultaneously. "Incoming transmission. Source identified. Vexery Dominion Supreme Command." Nathan accepted the communication without hesitation. Kaler appeared once again, standing with his hands calmly behind his back. This time there was no trace of amusement on his face. "Commander Brooks," he said evenly, "I have one final question before your deadline expires." Nathan met his eyes. "Go ahead." Kaler studied him for several long seconds before speaking. "Why are your weather satellites changing formation?" The room fell completely silent as Emily slowly turned toward the tactical display and realized that hundreds of blue markers had begun moving across Earth's orbit with quiet, almost invisible precision. The command center remained silent for almost 5 full seconds after Kaler asked the question. Nathan Brooks looked toward the tactical display instead of answering. Hundreds of blue markers continued drifting across Earth's orbit, each movement so slow that no human eye could have noticed it without the computer tracking every adjustment. Emily Carter stared at the screen. "They have been moving this entire time," she whispered. Benjamin Carter nodded. "Less than 3 inches per second. Slow enough to look stationary. Fast enough to be somewhere completely different when it matters." Nathan finally looked back at the alien commander. "You asked why they are changing formation." Kaler waited. Nathan smiled politely. "Because weather changes." The transmission ended before another word could be spoken. A young Vexery communications officer looked at Kaler. "Marshal, permission to classify that as psychological posturing?" Kaler did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the orbital display. "No," he said at last. "Increase long-range sensor resolution. I want continuous tracking on every civilian satellite around Earth. Everyone. Everyone." Across the fleet, sensor arrays shifted toward the planet. Powerful scanners swept across thousands of ordinary satellites, expecting hidden weapons or concealed reactors. They found none. Most carried weather instruments, communication equipment, navigation hardware, and decades of cosmetic wear. Several even transmitted public climate reports exactly as scheduled. The intelligence chief looked relieved. "Marshal, there is nothing unusual." Kaler folded his hands behind his back. "Then why did they move?" No one had an answer. Deep beneath Cheyenne Mountain, technicians calmly watched rows of status lights turn from blue to green. Nobody cheered. Nobody celebrated. They simply verified numbers and confirmed timing. Emily stepped beside her father. The satellites are exposing themselves. Benjamin gently shook his head. No, they are becoming exactly what they were always designed to be. Before she could ask another question, warning tones echoed through the facility. A large display highlighted dozens of victory reconnaissance drones accelerating toward low Earth orbit. Nathan immediately stepped beside the operations console. Report. A flight controller answered without looking up. Reconnaissance drones are approaching within 200 miles of the civilian network. They are preparing detailed proximity scans. Orders? Nathan asked. Benjamin answered before anyone else could. Let them look. Emily stared at him in disbelief. If they get close enough, they still will not understand what they are seeing, Benjamin replied. High above Earth, sleek reconnaissance craft glided silently between weather satellites and communications platforms, transmitting enormous volumes of sensor data back to the flagship. One drone paused beside an aging satellite whose faded paint barely reflected sunlight. Its scanners examined every panel, every antenna, every bolt. The report returned within seconds. Civilian weather platform. No offensive capability detected. Another drone inspected a navigation satellite. The same conclusion. Another examined an orbital relay station. Again, nothing threatening. Confident in the results, the victory pilots pushed deeper into the network. Suddenly, every drone received the same navigation warning. Relative object motion detected. The satellites were still drifting. Not randomly. Not independently. Together. Thousands of small adjustments formed patterns too large for any single pilot to recognize. Back aboard the flagship, Kaler watched hundreds of thin blue lines appear across the tactical display as the computer finally recognized the movement. His chief strategist frowned. Marshal, the satellites are not avoiding one another. Kaler took one slow step toward the projection. No, he said quietly. They are taking positions. At that exact moment, every countdown clock inside Earth's command centers reached zero. President Daniel Harper placed his hand on the authorization panel without hesitation. A calm voice filled the room. Black Horizon authorized. Phase 1 complete. Awaiting first operational command. President Daniel Harper rested his hand on the authorization panel for one final second before pressing it firmly. No alarms blared. No dramatic countdown echoed through the room. A single green light illuminated the console, and the calm computer voice returned. Black Horizon Phase 1 is now active. Nathan Brooks watched the orbital display without blinking. Thousands of blue markers continued moving across Earth's orbit with quiet precision, each one following a path calculated years before anyone believed it would ever be needed. Emily Carter looked from the screen to her father. That is it, she asked. That is the beginning? Benjamin Carter nodded. The beginning never looks impressive. That is why people overlook it. A technician raised his voice from across the command center. Marshal Voss has ordered the fleet into attack formation. Every screen shifted to the same image. The victory armada was changing shape. Massive carriers rotated into defensive positions, while rows of cruisers spread into perfect firing lines. Smaller escort vessels accelerated ahead, clearing lanes through the formation with flawless coordination. Nathan quietly folded his arms. They are following doctrine. Benjamin answered without taking his eyes off the display. Exactly as we expected. Nearly 100,000 miles above Earth, Grand Marshal Kaler Voss stood before the tactical projection. Every recommendation from his senior officers agreed on the same conclusion. Humanity had nothing capable of stopping a direct assault. The satellites remained civilian. The defense platforms remained outdated. The fleet remained hopelessly outmatched. Kaler slowly nodded. Begin the opening operation. One by one, victory warships powered their primary systems. Brilliant streams of energy gathered inside enormous emitter arrays, ready to disable Earth's orbital defenses without striking population centers. Kaler preferred victories that could later become examples of discipline instead of destruction. Give them one final opportunity, he ordered. A transmission immediately reached Earth. Nathan accepted it without hesitation. Kaler appeared once more, calm and composed. Commander Brooks, my fleet is prepared. You still have a choice. Nathan answered with the same steady expression he had carried since the first encounter. So do you? Kaler sighed. You believe something will change the outcome. I know something will. The Marshal shook his head. You continue speaking in riddles. Nathan looked briefly toward the tactical display before returning his attention to the transmission. No, I am giving you every chance to leave with your assumptions intact. The signal ended. Emily stared at Nathan. You really hoped he would leave? Nathan gave a quiet smile. I hoped he would keep his people alive. Silence settled across the room until the operations officer suddenly leaned forward. Enemy fleet is charging primary systems. Benjamin looked at the digital clock. Right on schedule. Another technician called out. Black Horizon reports complete orbital synchronization. Emily noticed something she had not seen before. Every weather satellite had stopped moving. Thousands of tiny machines now occupied fixed positions that stretched across near-Earth orbit like invisible points on a blueprint. They did not resemble weapons. They resembled pieces of a puzzle. On the flagship, Kaler studied the same formation. His instincts warned him that something had changed, but every scientific report insisted nothing dangerous existed. He finally made his decision. Proceed. Across the Victory formation, the first attack command spread from ship to ship. Targeting systems locked onto Earth's orbital defenses. Weapons reached full readiness. Fingers hovered over activation controls. Deep beneath Cheyenne Mountain, Nathan took one slow breath before speaking the words nobody outside the room had heard in more than 30 years. Black Horizon. Execute first light. Every blue marker on the tactical display vanished at exactly the same instant, and for the first time since entering the solar system, Grand Marshal Kaler Voss realized that he could no longer see what Earth had placed around him. For nearly 2 full seconds, nobody aboard the Victory flagship understood what had happened. The tactical display had not gone dark. It had become empty. Every blue marker representing Earth's civilian satellite network had disappeared at the exact same moment, leaving only the positions of the Dominion fleet glowing across the projection. Officers exchanged confused looks while sensor specialists hurried through diagnostic procedures. Report, Grand Marshal Kaler Voss ordered, his voice calm enough to steady the room. A young technician swallowed hard before answering. Long-range sensors are operational. Navigation systems are operational. Communications are operational. We have simply lost visual tracking of the satellite network. Kaler stepped closer to the display. Objects do not disappear. No, Marshal. Then find them. Across the bridge, every sensor array shifted into active search mode. High-resolution scanners swept the surrounding space, examining every mile around the fleet. Hundreds of weather satellites should have been easy to locate. They were not. Meanwhile, deep beneath Cheyenne Mountain, nobody celebrated. Nathan Brooks watched rows of green status lights flicker steadily across the operations wall. Emily Carter finally broke the silence. Where did they go? Benjamin Carter smiled without looking away from the display. Nowhere. She stared at him. But every sensor is searching for satellites, Benjamin replied. That is exactly why they cannot find the network anymore. Emily looked back at the tactical map, trying to understand. Every blinking point had vanished. Yet another layer of faint lines had quietly appeared around the Victory formation, almost like invisible threads weaving through space. What am I looking at? She asked. Nathan answered this time. Position, timing, geometry. Benjamin nodded. Not weapons. On the flagship, frustration began replacing confidence. An intelligence officer approached Kaler carrying updated sensor reports. Marshal, we have expanded the search radius to 500,000 miles. No confirmed contact. Another officer interrupted. Several reconnaissance drones are also reporting intermittent navigation errors. Kaler turned sharply. Errors? Yes, Marshal. Nothing severe. Small discrepancies. A few feet here. A few feet there. Instruments disagree on exact positioning. The bridge fell quiet again. Tiny errors meant little during ordinary travel, but during fleet operations measured in fractions of seconds, even inches mattered. Kaler looked toward his chief strategist. Delay the opening strike. Several officers looked surprised. Marshal, delay it. One commander objected carefully. Humanity has already activated whatever they intended to activate. Every additional minute favors them. Kaler slowly nodded. Exactly. Which means they wanted us to fire immediately. The room became silent as his reasoning settled over the staff. Far below, Nathan heard the updated intelligence report and smiled for the first time that day. Emily noticed it immediately. He stopped the attack. Nathan nodded. He is smarter than most people give him credit for. Benjamin folded his arms. That is why this was never about frightening him. It was about making him question his own certainty. Suddenly, another alert appeared across the command wall. A Victory scouting squad had broken formation without authorization, attempting to locate the missing satellites independently. Their signals remained stable for several moments before becoming strangely inconsistent. "Commander," a technician called out. The scout leader reports that empty space no longer matches fleet navigation charts. Nathan quietly stepped closer to the display. Now they are finally seeing the first clue. At the same moment, Kaler received the same transmission from the scouts. The veteran commander listened without interrupting until the pilot finished one sentence that caused every officer on the bridge to stop moving. "Marshal, the satellites never disappeared. We think they have been guiding our formation ever since we entered the solar system." Grand Marshal Kaler Voss replayed the scout transmission 3 times before anyone dared to speak. Every officer on the bridge waited for him to dismiss it as sensor failure, but he never did. Instead, he stepped toward the main display and enlarged the flight path of the Dominion fleet from the moment it crossed the edge of the solar system. Thousands of tiny course corrections appeared across the projection. Each adjustment had seemed insignificant at the time, barely a few feet over millions of miles, automatically accepted by the fleet's navigation systems to improve efficiency. Kaler slowly looked around the bridge. "Who approved these corrections?" The navigation chief answered immediately. "Marshal, they were generated by our own autonomous guidance computers." Kaler remained silent for several long seconds. "No," he finally said. "Our computers accepted them. Something else suggested them." Deep beneath Cheyenne Mountain, Emily Carter watched the same flight history unfold on Earth's tactical display. She looked at her father with growing disbelief. "You never hacked their ships." Benjamin Carter shook his head. "No, we never touched a single system they owned." "Then how?" Benjamin smiled. "You do not have to control a traveler if you quietly control the landmarks they trust." Emily stared at the web of invisible orbital paths surrounding Earth. The realization slowly settled in. Every weather satellite had spent decades collecting atmospheric data, adjusting position, correcting tiny orbital variations, and transmitting completely truthful information. They had never lied. They had simply become the most accurate navigation references in the solar system. Any visiting civilization seeking the safest and most efficient approach naturally aligned itself with those reference points. Nathan Brooks folded his arms. "They built their invasion formation using our map." Benjamin nodded once. "Exactly." A young technician looked up from his console. "Meaning they placed every capital ship exactly where we wanted them." Nobody celebrated. The room became even quieter than before. On the flagship, Kaler reached the same conclusion without hearing a single word from Earth. His expression did not change, but several officers noticed something they had never seen before. He removed one glove and rested his bare hand against the command console, thinking instead of reacting. "We assumed their satellites were passive infrastructure," he said softly. "They became infrastructure for us as well." The intelligence chief lowered his eyes. "Marshal, we used their reference network because it was more accurate than our own long-range calibration." Kaler nodded. "They never concealed a weapon." "No, they concealed an idea." The bridge fell silent. For the first time since entering the solar system, nobody laughed at humanity. A warning tone interrupted the stillness. Another report arrived from the scouting squad. Their commander sounded more confused than frightened. "Marshal, every safe maneuver our computers recommend keeps bringing us back toward the same geometric positions." Kaler looked at the display and finally saw it. The Dominion fleet was not trapped by force. It was trapped by its own confidence in the navigation logic it had trusted for weeks. Every efficient escape route flowed through the invisible architecture humanity had patiently built over decades. Back inside Black Horizon Control, Benjamin slowly closed the old paper binder he had carried for years. Emily noticed the worn title stamped across the faded cover. Civilian Orbital Weather Expansion Proposal. She looked up in amazement. This started as a weather program. Benjamin smiled. The best secrets are the ones everyone reads and nobody truly understands. Before another word could be spoken, every screen inside the command center flashed with a new alert. Victory fleet movement detected. Grand Marshal Kaler Voss had abandoned the original invasion plan and was ordering every ship to scatter immediately, even if it meant breaking centuries of Dominion combat doctrine. Grand Marshal Kaler Voss had spent his entire career teaching younger officers that discipline always defeated panic. Now he found himself giving an order that would have sounded impossible only an hour earlier. Break formation. Every ship chooses an independent escape vector. Ignore standard fleet geometry. The bridge froze. One captain finally spoke. Marshal, if we abandon formation, we lose mutual support. Kaler looked at the tactical display. If we keep formation, we lose the initiative. Within seconds, thousands of Dominion vessels began drifting away from their perfectly ordered positions. On paper, it was the correct decision. In practice, the movement produced something none of them expected. Every ship received a different navigation solution from the fleet computers. Tiny disagreements that had once measured only inches now became hundreds of feet, then thousands. Safe routes overlapped. Predicted flight paths contradicted one another. The fleet was no longer thinking as one mind. It had become thousands of commanders making thousands of independent calculations based on a reference system they no longer trusted. Deep beneath Cheyenne Mountain, Emily Carter watched the confusion spread across the tactical map. They are tearing apart their own coordination, she said quietly. Benjamin Carter nodded. We never needed to stop their ships. We only needed to make them stop trusting the math that kept them together. Nathan Brooks studied the display without any sign of satisfaction. How long until they realize what Black Horizon actually is? Benjamin smiled faintly. Longer than they have. A communications officer suddenly looked up from her console. Commander, the Dominion fleet has stopped charging primary weapons. Energy output is dropping across every battle group. Nathan nodded once. Because nobody fires until they know where everyone else is. Across the flagship, Kaler stared at dozens of conflicting reports arriving faster than anyone could read them. None described damage. None reported mechanical failure. Every system aboard every ship continued functioning exactly as designed. That was what troubled him most. His fleet had not been defeated by superior firepower. It had been outplanned before the first command had ever been issued. His chief strategist slowly lowered a data tablet onto the command console. Marshal, we have reconstructed the history of Earth's orbital network. Kaler scanned the report in silence. The oldest satellites had been launched decades before first contact with alien civilization. New satellites had been added gradually, each one justified as weather forecasting, climate research, disaster response, or civilian communications. Every budget request had been public. Every launch had been visible. Every technical specification had been available for anyone willing to read it. Nothing had been hidden. Kaler closed the report. They did not deceive us. The strategist looked confused. Marshal, they told the truth. We simply decided the truth was too ordinary to matter. Back on Earth, President Daniel Harper entered the Black Horizon control room for the first time. He looked at the enormous tactical display before turning toward Nathan. Status. Nathan answered calmly. No shots fired. No casualties reported. The invasion has stalled. Harper looked toward Benjamin. Can they recover? Benjamin took a slow breath before replying. Yes, eventually. They have excellent engineers. Excellent mathematicians. Excellent commanders. Emily frowned. Then what was the point? Benjamin looked at the planet rotating peacefully on the main display. To give them enough time to ask a different question. Almost as if the universe had been waiting for those words, an incoming transmission request appeared across every monitor. It did not come from the Dominion Military Command Channel. It came directly from Grand Marshal Kaler Voss himself, marked with the highest diplomatic priority the Dominion possessed, and for the first time since arriving in the solar system, he was requesting permission to speak before giving another order. Grand Marshal Kaler Voss stood alone before the transmission camera for several seconds before activating the signal. Behind him, the bridge of the Dominion flagship was almost silent. Officers who had spent the day preparing for conquest were now quietly studying navigation charts that no longer seemed as reliable as they had only hours earlier. The connection opened inside Black Horizon Control. Nathan Brooks appeared on the screen exactly as he had every previous time, standing straight with the same calm expression. Kaler spoke first. Commander Brooks, I have spent my career studying superior weapons. Today I learned there is something far more dangerous. Nathan waited. Patience, Kaler answered himself. Your civilization spent decades preparing for an enemy you had never met. Nathan gave a slight nod. We prepared for a mistake, not for a species. Kaler lowered his eyes for a brief moment. There is a difference. A very important one. Around the command center, nobody interrupted. President Daniel Harper, Benjamin Carter, and Emily Carter simply listened. There was no victory celebration waiting outside those reinforced walls. No speeches had been written. Earth had not won because another civilization had been humiliated. Earth had succeeded because a war had stopped before it truly began. Kaler looked back toward the camera. I reviewed every public document your governments released over the past 60 years. Every weather expansion proposal. Every climate initiative. Every orbital maintenance budget. Benjamin smiled quietly from the back of the room. They were all real. Kaler nodded. That is what I failed to understand. You never disguised the truth. We ignored it because it looked ordinary. Nathan answered with the same steady voice. Most people only search for secrets inside locked rooms. We learned long ago that the safest place to keep an important idea is out in the open. Kaler slowly removed the insignia from one shoulder of his ceremonial armor and placed it on the command console. It was not a surrender. It was respect. The Dominion fleet is withdrawing from the solar system. He paused before adding, not because we were forced to leave, because we finally understand we arrived without understanding the civilization in front of us. The transmission ended. Hours later, the enormous Vexery fleet quietly turned away from Earth. There were no desperate pursuits. No final attacks. One by one, the ships disappeared into deep space, carrying home a lesson no academy had ever taught. Inside Cheyenne Mountain, technicians powered down Black Horizon in the same quiet manner they had activated it. Green lights faded across the control room until only the ordinary weather network remained visible on the screens. Emily looked at her father and laughed softly. After all these years, they are weather satellites again. Benjamin picked up his old coffee mug. They always were. Nathan walked toward the exit before stopping beside the massive display showing Earth rotating peacefully beneath white clouds. Do you think they will come back? Emily asked. Nathan watched the planet for another moment. Probably. Then what changes? Nathan smiled. Next time they will ask questions before making assumptions. Months later, at the Dominion War Academy, first-year cadets entered a newly revised strategy classroom. The instructor erased decades of military doctrine from the main display and replaced it with a single sentence taken from Grand Marshal Kaler Voss's final report. The room remained silent as every student read the words. The greatest mistake a commander can make is believing that simplicity means weakness. The wisest civilizations do not hide their strength. They simply refuse to waste it proving something to people who have already decided what to believe. Millions of miles away, Earth continued launching weather satellites exactly as it always had. Most of the galaxy never looked twice. The few who did looked much more carefully than before.